No one in the courtroom expected what happened next. The victim's trembling voice filled the chamber as he recounted the night that changed his life, every word slow, deliberate, heavy. But just as he reached the moment of impact, a soft chuckle, barely audible but unmistakable, broke through the silence. Heads snapped toward the sound. Murmurs rippled. Eyes widened. And Judge Frank Caprio. He froze. Because the person who laughed was not some careless teenager, nor a distracted spectator. It was the daughter of an ambassador, a young woman who should have known better, a young woman who suddenly looked very, very small under the weight of 100 disbelieving stares. And what happened next stunned the entire courtroom. The morning had started like any other in Providence Municipal Court. The mood was steady. Routine cases, parking violations, speeding citations. But something different lingered in the air, a quiet tension that Judge Caprio sensed even before the defendant approached the bench. Her name was Lydia Marin, 22 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal coat with a diplomatic crest pin glinting faintly on the lapel. Her posture was stiff, almost rehearsed. Next to her sat a man in his late 50s, her father's personal legal advisor. The charge itself was simple on paper, failure to yield resulting in minor injury. But the victim, a grocery clerk named Samuel Ortiz, had filed a request to read a personal statement, a right that Judge Caprio always honored when appropriate. Samuel sat across the room clutching a small envelope, his hands trembling, not from fear of the judge but from the pain still lingering in his shoulder. The fluorescent lights caught the exhaustion carved under his eyes. Something was off. Everyone felt it. No one could name it yet. But they would soon. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward slightly, observing Lydia with the quiet, thoughtful study of a man who had seen more human stories than most people read in a lifetime. He noticed the nervous tapping of her shoe, the way her gaze flitted to the floor, the stiff attempt at composure. He softened his voice, not out of favoritism, but out of habit, the way he always approached the vulnerable, the anxious, the ones carrying invisible burdens. "Good morning," he said gently. "Ms. Marin, Mr. Ortiz. Let's take this step by step." Even as he spoke, he felt a subtle tug inside his chest. Something about Lydia wasn't matching the situation. Some heaviness shadowed her eyes, a heaviness he couldn't place. And Frank Caprio had a gift. He could sense when a case wasn't just a case. Before the laughter, before the shock, before the courtroom would nearly erupt, the story began like this. Lydia Marin had grown up in a world of polished floors, diplomatic dinners, and quiet corridors padded with privilege. But privilege did not always equal peace. Her father, Ambassador Gregory Marin, was known for his iron discipline and his insistence that his children reflect the family's dignity at all times. Lydia was the smallest shadow in a large political life. Since childhood, she had learned to keep emotions buried beneath layers of composure. Crying wasn't allowed. Fear was unattractive. Mistakes were unacceptable. And yet, life had a way of cracking the strongest surfaces. Her mother passed away when Lydia was 12. After that, her father's sternness hardened into stone. He loved his daughter, yes, but expressed it through rules, structure, achievements, expectations. By 22, Lydia was fluent in 4 languages, had traveled to 30 countries, and had not made a single decision in her life without permission. Except one, the night of the accident. She had been driving home after a late-night tutoring session. Not a party, not a gathering, just tutoring. Her father demanded she fill her time with resume-worthy activities. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, her mind somewhere far from the road. When Samuel Ortiz stepped into the crosswalk with a bag of groceries, she did see him, but a second too late. The injury wasn't severe. A bruised shoulder, a sprain. But the guilt? For her, it was catastrophic, and she had carried it silently for weeks, like a weight pressing on her lungs. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Marin, I understand you've acknowledged fault for the accident. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lydia replied, her voice tight. I didn't see him in time. I should have. I accept responsibility." Her legal advisor leaned forward as if to intercept, but the judge raised a hand gently. "Let her speak," Judge Caprio said. Lydia's eyes flickered with surprise. Frank turned to the victim. "Mr. Ortiz, would you like to share your statement now?" Samuel stood, gripping the envelope. His voice quivered as he read. "I'm not here for revenge," he began. "I just wanted to understand. That night changed more than just my shoulder." He spoke about missing work for 2 weeks, about falling behind on rent, about the fear he still felt crossing any street, but then his voice shifted, softened. "I don't think she's a bad person," he said. "I actually saw her face right after it happened. She looked terrified. I felt bad for her, too. I just wanted her to know the impact. That's all." Lydia's hands tightened on the table. The entire courtroom was silent. And then it happened. As Samuel recounted the moment he fell onto the pavement, describing the sharp shock of pain, Lydia let out a tiny, breathy laugh, a nervous reflex, the kind caused by anxiety, not humor. But no one knew that. Gasps rippled instantly. Samuel froze, hurt flashing across his face. The courtroom stirred. Even the bailiff raised his brows. Lydia's face went pale. I'm so sorry. I didn't," she stammered, but her voice died in her throat. Judge Caprio's expression shifted, slowly, gravely, and the room felt like it had tilted off its axis. Frank Caprio placed his hands on the bench, his eyes fixed on Lydia, not with anger, but with a piercing depth that felt like he could see right through her. "Ms. Marin," he said quietly, "what exactly did you find amusing about Mr. Ortiz's testimony?" Her lips parted. No sound came out. Her legal advisor rose. "Your Honor, I think—" Frank raised one eyebrow. "I didn't ask you," he said calmly. "Sit down." A hush fell like a curtain. Lydia swallowed, trembling. I wasn't laughing at him. It was something else. I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Then explain it," Caprio said gently. "Help me understand." Her breath quivered, and in that moment, something broke in her expression, a crack in years of emotional armor. The courtroom leaned in, because behind that tiny, misplaced laugh lay a truth no one expected, a truth that would turn the entire case on its head. Lydia's throat tightened as every eye in the courtroom bore into her. Her fingers shook against the polished wooden table. Judge Caprio waited with the patience of a man who understood that, sometimes, silence speaks louder than an answer. Finally, Lydia inhaled, deep, shaky, fragile. "It wasn't a laugh of disrespect," she whispered. "I know how it looked. I know how it sounded. But I swear, Your Honor, I would never laugh at someone in pain." Emotion strained her voice. Her eyes glistened. It was a reflex, a release. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I've been trying not to cry for weeks, trying not to break. And when Mr. Ortiz spoke about falling, something inside me, something I've been holding down, just slipped." She wiped a tear quickly, almost panicked, as though even crying might be against some rule she had been raised with. Samuel Ortiz watched her, his anger fading into confusion. Then empathy. Judge Caprio leaned forward, studying her face. He could see the truth tugging at her seams. He could see the young woman, just a girl, really, trying to carry a weight that had never been hers to carry alone. "Ms. Marin," he said softly, "you seem like someone who has a great deal more to say. Lydia bit her lip. "I'm afraid to say it." "Why?" Caprio asked, and then she whispered the words that shifted the air in the courtroom. "Because my father told me not to." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. The legal advisor stiffened. Judge Caprio's gaze sharpened. "Your father instructed you not to speak?" he asked. Her voice was barely audible. "To show no emotion. To uphold the family's image. To stay silent unless absolutely necessary. I wasn't even supposed to apologize publicly. He said it would make the embassy look weak." Samuel blinked in disbelief. Judge Caprio's brows lowered, not in anger, yet, but in concern. "And do you believe that?" he asked gently. A single tear rolled down Lydia's cheek. "No," she whispered. "I don't." With the truth seeping out, Caprio gave her a nod, silent permission to continue. Lydia clasped her hands together, the knuckles white. "I've spent my entire life being told what to feel," she said. "How to stand, how to speak, how to represent my father's name. I was raised in embassies, meeting rooms, formal dinners. I learned to speak politely before I learned to ride a bike." She let out a trembling breath. "When my mother died, I tried to cry at the funeral, and my father pulled me aside and told me, 'Ambassadors' daughters don't cry in public.' I was 12. A soft gasp came from the back row. "That's when I started watching people instead of talking to them," Lydia continued. "Started perfecting a smile I could wear even when I felt like I was falling apart." She swallowed. "The night of the accident. I wasn't coming from a party like many assumed. I was coming from tutoring a student who struggles with English. It's the one thing I love doing. Something my father calls a waste of diplomacy potential." Her voice cracked. "I was exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, just drained. I drifted for half a second. And that half second hurt someone who didn't deserve it." She turned slowly toward Samuel. "I have replayed that night over and over. I've cried alone, at night, where no one could see. And today, when you spoke about falling, when you described hitting the pavement, my chest tightened. I felt everything all at once, and my body reacted in the worst possible way." Lydia's shoulders dropped as if the confession itself weighed 50 pounds. "It wasn't a laugh," she whispered. "It was a breakdown." The courtroom fell into a heavy, contemplative hush. Even the legal advisor stared at her with astonishment, hearing, perhaps for the first time, the real person behind the diplomatic mask. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, letting her words settle like dust. "Mr. Ortiz," he said, turning to the victim, "is there anything you'd like to say?" Samuel stood again, his voice gentler this time. "I didn't know all that," he said. "I just thought you didn't care." "I do," Lydia breathed. "Every day." Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, debating something internally. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said softly. "But I know what guilt feels like, and what pressure feels like. I didn't want to ruin your life. I just wanted you to understand that the accident affected mine." Her eyes flooded. "I do," she whispered, "more than you know." Judge Caprio watched them, two human beings from completely different worlds meeting in a moment of vulnerable truth. Then he cleared his throat. "Miss Marin," he said gently, "I have one more question, but I want you to answer it honestly, not as a diplomat's daughter, not as someone representing an embassy. As you." She nodded, trembling. "When was the last time someone allowed you to simply be human?" The question hit her like a blow. Her lips parted, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Then, "Never," she whispered. Her voice broke. "I have never been allowed to be human." And with those words, Lydia Marin began to tremble uncontrollably, silent tears slipping down her cheeks, not hidden this time, not pushed away, not masked. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing. She was simply feeling. Judge Caprio leaned back, letting out a quiet sigh, the kind that comes from decades of watching people finally remove the armor they've been forced to wear. But then he asked something unexpected. "Ms. Marin, did your father instruct you not to apologize to Mr. Ortiz?" She nodded. "Yes." "And did he instruct you not to show emotion today?" Another nod. "Yes. He said it would reflect poorly on him, on the embassy, on the government." Caprio exhaled slowly. "And this pressure, is this why you laughed when overwhelmed?" She looked down. "It's the only way my body releases anything when I'm not allowed to cry." The judge's heart ached, not with pity, but with understanding. Some people grow up impoverished of money. Others grow up impoverished of warmth. Suddenly, Lydia's reflexive laugh wasn't the scandal. The scandal was that no one in her life had ever taught her a healthy way to feel. But then, the twist. Lydia reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a crumpled envelope, identical in size to the one Samuel had brought. "This," she whispered, "is the apology letter I wrote weeks ago. The one I wanted to send. The one my father forbid me from delivering." Judge Caprio gestured softly. "Would you like to read it?" She hesitated, years of conditioning weighing down her hand. Then, with a quivering breath, she opened the letter. "I wrote this the night after the accident," she said. She began to read. "Mr. Ortiz, you don't know me, and you may never want to, but I know what I did hurt you, and even if it was unintentional, it was my responsibility. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm sorry for the fear I created. I'm sorry that my mistake made your life harder. I hope one day you can forgive me, but even if you can't, please know that I will carry this lesson with me for the rest of my life. Lydia." Her voice cracked. "It was never supposed to stay in the envelope. But he made me hide it." She lowered the letter slowly. And in that moment, the courtroom was not looking at an ambassador's daughter. They were looking at a young woman finally allowed to speak for herself. For a long, still moment, Judge Frank Caprio said nothing. He simply watched Lydia, her shaking breath, her trembling hands, the fragile vulnerability she had tried so desperately to suppress. Then his eyes drifted to Samuel, a working man, tired, honest, trying to rebuild his life one shift at a time, two people from two different worlds intersecting at a single moment of fate. Frank had seen thousands of cases in his decades on the bench, but every now and then, a story pierced through the legal pages and exposed the human heart beneath. This, he thought, is one of those stories. He pressed his fingertips together. The law is clear, he reminded himself. She caused an injury. She must be held accountable. But justice was more complicated. Justice required listening between the lines. Justice required seeing past titles, past wealth, past circumstance, and compassion. Compassion required courage. He took a slow breath. This young woman isn't dangerous. She isn't careless. She's emotionally starved, pressured, terrified, and trying, desperately, to find her own voice. He looked again at Samuel. And this man doesn't want revenge. He wants recognition, understanding, humanity. Frank leaned back, feeling the familiar tug in his chest, the sense that the right decision was rarely the easy one, that the legal penalty and the moral path were not always the same. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting his years of experience settle like dust in sunlight. Then he opened them, gaze steady, warm, and firm. It was time. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Ms. Marin," he said softly, "would you please stand?" Lydia rose, shaky but upright. Her eyes were red, swollen, unmasked. "Mr. Ortiz, please stand as well." Samuel stood, uncertain but attentive. Frank addressed them both. "I've listened carefully to your statements," he said, "and what I see in front of me is not a reckless driver and a victim seeking vengeance. What I see are two human beings trying to understand each other." The courtroom leaned in. Caprio continued. "Ms. Marin, you made a mistake, one that could have been far worse, but you did take responsibility, and I believe your remorse is genuine." Lydia nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "But there is another issue," Caprio said, "one that concerns me even more." Silence fell. "You have lived your entire life under pressure so immense that your body doesn't know how to release emotion except through an inappropriate reaction. You were taught to suppress what is most natural about being human." Lydia looked down, shoulders trembling. Judge Caprio's tone softened. "And let me tell you something you should have been told a long time ago. It is not a weakness to cry, it is not a flaw to feel, and it is not disrespectful to acknowledge your humanity." A tear escaped Lydia's eye, this one slow, unhurried, like a truth finally allowed to live. Samuel swallowed, moved. "Now," Caprio continued, "about the matter of your penalty." The legal advisor straightened. Lydia froze. Samuel held his breath. Judge Caprio tapped his finger on the bench. "Given Mr. Ortiz's injury," he began, "the fine for this violation is typically significant, and I have the authority to issue community service or additional penalties." Lydia nodded, her fear visible. Frank continued. "But here's what I believe justice looks like today." The room went still. "I am suspending the entire fine." A collective murmur swept through the seats. Lydia gasped. The legal advisor blinked. Caprio raised a hand. "However, this is not clemency without purpose." He looked directly at Lydia. "You will not pay money. You will pay with something far more valuable." She held her breath. "You will volunteer 100 hours at a community literacy program, helping people who struggle with English. The very thing you love doing. The thing that makes you feel human. The thing your father calls a waste of potential." Lydia's mouth fell open in disbelief. "I want you," Caprio said, "to spend the next several months not as the daughter of an ambassador, but as Lydia, a young woman who can make a difference in the world through compassion, not politics." Her face broke, utterly, beautifully. "And one more condition," he added. Her heart thudded. "You will write Mr. Ortiz a new letter. Not the one written in fear, but the one written after you learn what it means to feel freely." A tear rolled down Lydia's cheek. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." Caprio turned to Samuel. "Mr. Ortiz, do you find this resolution fair?" Samuel looked at Lydia, at her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands, the raw sincerity that no diplomatic title could fake. "Yes," he said, "I do." Caprio nodded. "Then this court considers the matter resolved." Lydia sank back into her seat, overwhelmed, not with relief, though that was part of it, but with something deeper, permission. She had been given permission to breathe, to feel, to be. Samuel approached her slowly, unsure if it was appropriate, but driven by something human. "Hey," he said softly, "I accept your apology, and for what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you realize." Her lips trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. He extended a hand. She took it. Two worlds, briefly touching with understanding. The legal advisor approached, but Lydia lifted a hand, politely, firmly. "Not now," she said. "I need a moment. For myself." It was the first boundary she had ever set in public. Judge Caprio watched quietly from the bench, something warm settling in his chest. Before adjourning, Caprio spoke one last time. "Let me leave you with a thought," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of humanity witnessed. "Titles, wealth, and status are temporary, but character is built in moments like these." He looked from Lydia to Samuel. "I've learned that some people are raised with very little money, yet grow up rich in love. Others are raised with every resource imaginable, yet grow up emotionally starved. Lydia closed her eyes, absorbing the truth. What matters, Caprio continued, is not where you come from, but what you choose to become after life humbles you. He looked directly at Lydia. And today, Miss Marin, life didn't humble you. You humbled yourself. Her lips shook as she whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." Caprio nodded gently. "This case," he said, "is dismissed." The gavel struck softly, almost ceremonially. Lydia breathed out, shaky, fragile, new, and the courtroom slowly emptied. But the story lingered in the air like a quiet, powerful echo. No one expected the ambassador's daughter to laugh. No one expected the truth behind it. And no one expected the decision that followed. But justice, real justice, is rarely what people expect. As Lydia stepped out of the courthouse into the cold Rhode Island air, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Warmth, not from the sun, not from privilege, but from relief. The kind that comes only after you finally tell the truth you've been carrying alone. Samuel walked past her, heading in the opposite direction. He gave her a gentle nod. She returned it. Different lives, different stories, but connected forever by one shared moment of humanity. And somewhere behind her, in a quiet courtroom, Judge Frank Caprio leaned back in his chair, feeling grateful. Not for making a decision, but for witnessing a young woman finally allow herself to be human. Because justice isn't just about laws. Justice is about hearts. And every once in a while, a courtroom becomes the place where a heart learns how to heal.